In ancient Sparta, a child's fate was decided at birth. The Gerousia, the Council of Elders, examined every newborn. If the baby was deemed weak, malformed, or unlikely to survive, it was left to die on a hillside called Apothete. Only the strongest were allowed to live. At age 7, Spartan boys were taken from their families to begin the Agoge, a brutal training regimen designed to forge them into fearless warriors. They were taught to endure hunger, cold, and pain. They slept on reeds and were given minimal food, encouraged to steal to survive, but punished severely if caught. The Agoge also included combat training with wooden swords and shields. Boys were organized into packs and forced to fight each other, often to the point of injury. The goal was to desensitize them to violence and build absolute loyalty to Sparta. Those who showed weakness were humiliated or beat. At age 20, those who survived the Agoge became full Spartan soldiers, known as homoi or equals. They were granted land and helots to work it, allowing them to dedicate their lives entirely to military training. But the price was total obedience. They lived in barracks until age 30 and could be killed in battle. 7 Spartan boys were taken from their families and enrolled in the Agoge, a state-run training program that would last until they were 20. They were organized into groups called bonds and placed under the authority of a young adult overseer, the paidonomos. The boys were deliberately underfed. They expected to steal food to survive, but if caught, they were severely beaten, not for stealing, but for getting caught. This harsh lesson in cunning and stealth was meant to forge resourceful warriors. The Agoge also emphasized physical endurance. Boys exercised naked, slept on reeds, and endured harsh conditions. They were taught to read and write only the bare essentials, enough to follow orders, not to question. At age 12, the training intensified. Boys were given only 1 cloak a year, went barefoot, and were encouraged to fight among themselves. The strongest rose to leadership, while the weak were often humiliated or killed. Given just enough food to survive, but not enough to satisfy hunger. To supplement their meager rations, they were encouraged to steal food from gardens and stores. But if caught, they were severely beaten, not for stealing, but for being caught. Whippings were a routine part of Spartan education. Boys were taught to endure pain without complaint. They were expected to show no emotion, to remain silent even as the lash cut into their backs. This was not cruelty for its own sake, it was training. The Spartans believed that a warrior who could not control his own body could never control a battlefield. Pain was a teacher, and the lesson was absolute discipline. But the Agoge was not just about physical endurance. It was also a school of cunning and deception. Boys were taught to lie, cheat, and steal, as long as they did not get caught. These skills were considered essential for a soldier who might need to survive behind enemy lines or gather intelligence. The line between virtue and vice was drawn not by the act itself. This moral flexibility extended to the highest levels of Spartan society. Spartan kings and generals were known for their cunning, their willingness to use bribery, and their strategic retreats when necessary. The Agoge produced not just brave warriors, but resourceful survivors. And in the brutal world of ancient Greece, survival often mattered more. Were flogged publicly, sometimes to the point of death, as a test of endurance. The most famous ritual was the diamastigosis, held at the altar of Artemis Orthia, where boys competed to withstand the most lashes without crying out. The main food was a black broth, a concoction of pork, blood, and vinegar, which was notoriously unappetizing but believed to build toughness. Spartan women, though not soldiers, were expected to be physically fit and mentally strong. They trained in running, wrestling, and discus throwing, and were encouraged to speak boldly. Their primary role was to produce healthy sons for the state, and they enjoyed more freedom than other Greek women, including the right to own. The Helots, a subjugated population of Messenia and Laconia, vastly outnumbered the Spartans. To control them, the Spartans instituted the Krypteia, a secret police force of young warriors who would patrol the countryside and assassinate Helots deemed dangerous. This constant state of fear kept the Helots in check, but also created deep resistance. Sparta's military dominance eventually waned. The Battle of Leuctra in 371 BC saw the Thebans, led by Epaminondas, crush the Spartan phalanx using innovative tactics. This defeat shattered the myth of Spartan invincibility and marked the beginning of Sparta's decline as a blood, salt, and vinegar. Plutarch records that an Athenian visitor, after tasting it, said he now understood why Spartans faced death so calmly. They would rather die than eat such food. This diet was designed to make them hardy, not comfortable. Spartan boys slept on beds made of rushes. They cut themselves with a knife to prove their toughness. The Agoge, the Spartan education system, was brutal. Boys were taken from their families at age 7 and trained to endure pain, hunger, and cold without complaint. They were encouraged to steal food to survive, but punished severely if caught, not for stealing. This system produced soldiers who were famously disciplined and fearless. At the Battle of Thermopylae in 480 BC, King Leonidas led 300 Spartans and a few thousand allies against a massive Persian army. The Spartans held the narrow pass for 3 days, fighting with spears and shields, until a traitor revealed a mountain path that allowed the Persians to surround them. Leonidas and his men fought to the last, knowing they would die. Their stand became a symbol of courage against overwhelming odds. After the battle, the Greeks erected a monument with the famous epitaph, "Go tell the Spartans, stranger passing by, that here obedient to their law." They gathered themselves from the Eurotas River. In winter, they were allowed to add a layer of thistledown for warmth, but only as a privilege earned through good behavior. Comfort was seen as weakness. From age 12, boys underwent intense physical training: running, wrestling, boxing, and the use of the spear and sword. They learned to endure pain without crying out. Every year, the boys were publicly flogged in front of the altar of Artemis Orthia. The one who endured the longest without flinching was declared the victor. Some died from the ordeal, but their families were honored. This ritual, called the diamastagosis, was both a test of endurance and a religious ceremony. Spartan education also included stealth and survival. Boys were encouraged to steal food from the communal messes to supplement their meager rations. But if caught, they were severely beaten, not for stealing, but for being clumsy. This taught them cunning and resourcefulness. They slept on beds made of reeds they gathered. At age 20, after years of brutal training, a Spartan man could become a full citizen and soldier. He would join a Syssitia, a military dining club of about 15 men, where he would eat, sleep, and fight alongside his comrades for the rest of his life. This lifelong bond created the most feared infantry in Greece, the Spartan hoplites, whose phalanx would dominate battlefields for centuries. They practiced with the xiphos, the short sword, and the dori, the spear. They also learned the phalanx formation, fighting shoulder to shoulder with their comrades. The climax of the Agoge was the Krypteia, a secret mission for young men around age 18. They were sent into the countryside. With only a knife and minimal supplies, expected to survive by stealth and cunning. The mission was to hunt and kill helots, the enslaved population of Sparta, as a test of surviving the Krypteia and completing the Agoge made a young man a full Spartan citizen, a homios, an equal. He could now join the Syssitia, the communal dining groups, and vote in the assembly. But the cost was a lifetime of military service and absolute obedience, with only a dagger and minimal supplies. Their task, to survive and to terrorize the helot population. They were allowed to kill any helot they encountered at night, especially the strongest, to prevent rebellion. An important aspect of the Agoge was the relationship between older and younger boys. Older boys acted as mentors and disciplinarians, often forming intense bonds that lasted into adulthood. This system created a tight-knit warrior class, but at a terrible cost. The helots, who vastly outnumbered their masters, lived in constant fear. Any sign of strength or leadership among them was brutally crushed. This was the dark foundation of Spartan power. Warriors, often in their 20s, would take a younger boy as an eromenos, a beloved. This relationship was meant to be educational and emotional, fostering loyalty and bravery in battle. The older man was responsible for the boy's training and behavior. Spartan women, unlike their Athenian counterparts, were educated and trained in physical fitness, music, and dance. They could own land and manage property, giving them a degree of independence rare in the ancient world. Spartan women were also expected to be physically strong to bear healthy children for the state. They competed in athletic events like running and wrestling, often in public, which shocked other Greeks. Physically trained, they were expected to produce strong children for the state. They famously told their sons to return from battle with their shield or on it, meaning victorious or dead. A mother who lost a son in battle was honored, One whose son fled was disgraced, even as adults. Spartan women managed their households and estates while the men were away at war. They had more freedom and influence than other Greek women, owning land and controlling property. This was unusual in the ancient world, where women were often confined to the home. Spartan women also participated in athletic competitions, running and wrestling in the nude, just like men. This was shocking to other Greeks who saw it as immodest. But for Spartans, it was a way to ensure strong mothers for a strong state. Spartan women were also known for their sharp wit and outspokenness. When a foreign woman asked why Spartan women were the only ones who could rule men, Gorgo, the wife of King Leonidas, replied, "Because we are the only ones who give birth to men." Spartan soldiers ate together in common messes called Syssitia. Each man contributed food from his land. The meals were simple and the conversation was monitored. This reinforced equality and camaraderie among warriors and prevented private life. The Agoge produced superb soldiers, but at a terrible cost. Spartan society was rigid, militaristic, and brutal. Boys were taken from their families at age 7 and subjected to years of harsh training, deprivation, and violence. Boys were encouraged to steal food to survive and were brutally whipped if caught. The strongest and most cunning survived, while the weak were often cast out or died. This created a warrior elite, but also a society devoid of empathy and individuality. This brutal system produced the most feared army in Greece, but it also left Sparta culturally and intellectually stagnant. While Athens gave the world philosophy, art, and democracy, Sparta gave only warriors. The cost of discipline was the loss of humanity. Boys who failed were ostracized. Those who succeeded became part of a warrior elite that ruled over a vast Helot population. The constant fear of Helot revolt kept Sparta in a state of perpetual readiness. The system created a culture of obedience, but also of fear. This militaristic society, built on the backs of Helots, would eventually face its greatest test in the Persian Wars. And repression. The Spartan Agoge has been romanticized and misunderstood. Modern military training programs borrow its ethos of hardship and discipline, but the reality was far harsher than any modern boot camp. The Agoge was not just training. It was a lifelong indoctrination that shaped every aspect of Spartan existence. Boys were taken from their families at age 7 and thrown into a brutal system designed to break their individual will. They were starved, beaten, and forced to steal for survival. The goal was to create warriors who felt no pain, no fear, and no loyalty except to Sparta. The most famous test was the Krypteia, where teenage boys were sent into the countryside with only a knife and orders to kill any helot they found at night. This was not just training. It was a ritual of terror designed to keep the enslaved population in check. Survival was not guaranteed. Those who failed were cast out, left to die, or became helots themselves. The Agoge produced the finest soldiers in Greece, but at a terrible cost. Every Spartan warrior was a product of this system, and its prisoner. From birth to death, the Agoge created a society that valued endurance, loyalty, and sacrifice above all else. It produced warriors who fought with legendary courage, but it also produced a society that was brutal, inflexible, and ultimately unsustainable. The same discipline that made Sparta great also led to its decline. The rigid system that created invincible warriors could not adapt to a changing world. Sparta's population shrank, its economy stagnated, and its enemies grew stronger. The city that once terrified Greece became a shadow of its former self. The Battle of Leuctra in 371 BC was the beginning of the end. The Theban general Epaminondas used a new tactic. He concentrated his best troops on one wing, overwhelming the Spartan right. The Spartan king Cleombrotus was killed, and the invincible Spartan army was defeated for the first time in a land battle. After Leuctra, Sparta never recovered. It lost its helot workforce, its territory, and its status as a major power. By the 2nd century BC, Sparta was a tourist attraction for Romans, who came to see the strange customs of a once fearsome warrior society. The Agoge had created a legend, but it could not survive reality. The Agoge is gone, but its echoes remain. In every soldier who pushes past exhaustion, in every society that asks its young to sacrifice for the whole. But the question lingers: at what point does discipline become destruction? And what do we lose when we forge warriors from children? The Agoge may be a relic, but its shadow stretches long. We still wrestle with the same questions. How much should a society demand from its young, and at what cost?